Unscripted, unrehearsed, welcome to Talking Element. Welcome to Talking Element. We are discussing week 34 of Acts, Do You Believe? Today I'm joined with Aaron, who delivered said message. He's not supposed to look at the camera. And Joseph, totally kidding.
But I'm breaking the fourth wall. I'm allowed to do that
I
now.
know. And Joseph Borjas, he's joining us. Thank you.
Don't look at the camera.
I'm not going to look at the camera. I was given strict instructions.
Donald is behind the camera, and Mark Pruitt is behind sound. Shout out to them.
Who's looking at the camera?
I'm the host. I get to look at the camera. Okay. Where I'd like to start is Aaron. Would you mind giving like a real quick, high-level view of the message in case somebody's watching this who didn't see the service?
Yeah, the message today about Do You Believe is Paul is in front of some Roman officials, and you really get the Roman officials' view of what Paul is saying. Because the Roman officials are kind of like talking to one another going, it's something about this dead guy who we killed, but Paul says he's alive. And so it's all these things that kind of surround that, like how they see that. And what Paul does in the middle of this is he gets to a place where he's talking to this guy named Agrippa, who is Jewish, who knows all the Jewish prophets and all the things that have come about through that heritage. And so Paul goes through his story and about what God is doing. And at the end of all this, he looks at Agrippa and he goes, Agrippa, you believe the prophets. I know you do. Do you believe? And Agrippa's like, holy cow, calm down, Paul. Do you want to make me a Christian? And Paul is like, yes, I do want you to become a believer. And that's kind of the whole thing of it is, you know, do you believe, or do we really believe what we say we believe about Jesus? And that's kind of what I think the questions need to surround this week in the Notes Night stuff.
And so we're not going to have a full Notes Night discussion here. We're going to have just a 10-minute conversation that will help spur on further conversation. But our hope in this is that we will demonstrate what some of the answers we would say. So where I'd like to start the discussion is with the two questions that you said in the middle of the message. The first one was, how would those who don't know Jesus but know you describe faith in Jesus based on your life?
I think that's an interesting question, because what you have to do is you have to have non-Christians in your life in order to be able to ask that question to. So if we only surround ourselves with other believers, we don't really get the wide perspective I think that God intends for us to have in the world. So you have to have people around you who don't actually believe in order to ask a question like that too, so you can see.
Yeah. And interesting too how you can tweak that question just in tiny little ways, and it changes it up so much. The concept of someone who doesn't believe, an outsider, if you will, and thinking through what their perspective is looking in on our world, which we get caught up in, our little bubble that you can fall into as believers sometimes. Yeah, really, really interesting idea to explore. As I understand it, right? What is it in my life that others may see that may speak into, what the gospel is, right? And so, maybe for me, it's less of what I say directly and maybe how I live my life, what I focus on, where I spend my time, how I interact with my family. And I think, in my experience, a lot of, I guess what I would hope people would see and kind of gather about the gospel through interacting with me would come from those interactions, where I maybe come up short on the words that I'm sharing directly sometimes. I hope that my actions in some of these situations kind of translate into or point to the gospel.
When I was like 18 years old, I was at this car stereo place, and this guy was working on this car stereo.
Lombards?
No.
Okay.
No. And he was, maybe. I don't know.
It's the only one I know.
It was so long ago. Anyway,
Yeah.
But this guy was working on this car in the back, and his son came up, and his son was like 5 years old, and he just was really sweet to his son, and his son ran off, and I just go, are you a Christian? And he goes, yeah. And I was just like, oh, because there was a difference about how he treated his kid and how he interacted with me.
Yeah.
Just kind. And there's this book I'm reading right now, and there's this lady in it. She gives this great illustration of trees, and she says that Christians should be like trees in the world, because Christians they're supposed to take in the pollution that's around us and put back out life. And that's what trees do. They take in CO2, which kills us, and put out oxygen. And that's what we're to be. We're to be people who take in all the stuff and not react, get angry with it, but give out oxygen back. And trees give it to animals that want to eat their bark and tear them down. It doesn't matter who it is. Trees give out oxygen to all, and we're supposed to do that too. Give out this oxygen back to people who like us and don't like us, and people we agree with and don't agree with. And that'd go a long way, I think, in our modern culture.
Oh my gosh, even, today especially, I mean, COVID, right? The sea of information. It's not just COVID, right? Everything that's happening around us, and the flood of information, right? That's just coming at us, right? So, I mean, you stated that analogy and the CO2 coming in, and I always think of the information that we're taking in.
COVID starts with CO.
There you go, right? The CO-19. No, but the information can be toxic, right? Can be, right? Not all of it, but it's so hard to sift through. And I see it in other people, and it seems to present itself in fear, right? People who aren't believers, right? They're taking in all this information, and what's coming out of them is fear.
Yeah.
Right. I try to be more discerning about it. And try to have more hope, right, in the situation, because I have a greater hope outside of this world. And here's a challenge, right, for us, for anyone, especially in today's day and age, right? What are your actions? What are your reactions? How are they going to be perceived by others? And so I would hope at some point I can, live in such a way where that hopeful response sends a message, maybe creates an opportunity for them to see just another option. How do we take advantage of the opportunities to communicate that idea of hope and a lack of fear in a way that isn't careless or reckless? And I know this is a term that we believers like to turn to, but you're going to do it with love, right? That could look any number of ways.
I have been angry the past couple weeks, just like every little thing. People, this is true. He called me out on it, and I appreciate that. And thinking about this question, like as I interact with those who don't know Jesus and they see that anger, what is it that they see about Christ and the faith in Christ? For me, it boils down to, I really think I've done a disservice where I am effectively saying there is no difference. Like I'm looking to either political things, or I'm looking for this COVID to go away, for my life to be complete, for me to feel not angry and to feel better about myself or life or whatnot. And so for me, that's, as you were saying that, I was thinking about that, of like, I don't necessarily speak the gospel to every non-believer, right? But my life does in one way or another. And the gospel I've been sharing the past few weeks has been ugly. It has been negative. It has been angry. And I don't think I'm not the father loving his son in that garage, right? I'm just another dude on the street who's pissed off.
Yeah, I'm a father, and I'm not always perfect to my sons. Trust me, it's easy to get there, especially right now with things being so touchy and sensitive. And I've totally lost my train of thought, so I'll leave it to Aaron.
This guy's kid did ride his skateboard up and then off, so it wasn't like the kid was stuck there with him all day long either. So I think it's important for us as believers to look at what our actions are truly saying, because as believers, we believe that Jesus died for our sins. And yet, when you look at a lot of the debate, that's going on, cultural, racial, political, COVID, there's all the sides where people are arguing, and it's like what they really want to do is crucify the other side. It's like, I don't care if you changed, I don't care what you say to say you're sorry. I mean, Paul killed Christians. Today in our culture, it'd be like, God can't use that guy. He'd be written off. And yet we get most of the New Testament from this guy. And what we want today is to find the people we dislike and crucify them. And as believers, we have to take a step back from that and realize that Christ was the one who was crucified for us, so we don't need to crucify other people. We can actually offer some grace. And I think that's the importance of understanding what the gospel is and does for us.
We had a Delta school teachers here, and if I was angry that day, which I was earlier in that day, and I had an opportunity to have a dialogue with somebody who isn't a believer, and they saw me in my anger. Like, what is it that I can express in that? So where I love where you went with the message was, in Paul's story, his testimony, he says, I was the worst. The only thing good in me is Christ. And that is true of our conversion for sure, but it's true of me today. The worst of me is still me and my sin, and the good in me is still what Christ has done and is doing, but isn't yet complete. And so I wonder, like, how can I communicate that the wretchedness is still me and my sin, but that doesn't mean that Jesus isn't good, and it doesn't mean that he isn't still working. Is there a way to communicate that?
Well, I think, the first step is just being honest with people. And I think especially from the non-believer's perspective, is not trying to paint a picture that's untrue, right? So be honest about it, that you do have struggles, that you do get angry, you do get frustrated, that the things that happen in this world frustrate you just as much as the other person. But in spite of that, right, you have Christ, you have the gospel, you have hope. One of the biggest disservices believers can do is not be honest about reality, struggles. We are all still human. We're all still sinners. That doesn't go away, right? But we have the hope.
We read and base our lives on this book that just has people who fail and fall over and over. And what we've tried to do today is we go, oh, that wasn't really a failure. And God's like, that's why it's there, because you're all a bunch of knuckleheads. Yeah. I think, it's like Joseph said, you own it. And next time you see that person, hey, you probably saw the worst of me. And, well, maybe not the worst. I can get a lot worse than that. But, I feel like I need to own that in front of you and just let you know that it's a good thing that I don't base my worth in my life about how I responded that day. It's based upon what Jesus has said over me. And that's a natural way to even just share a bit of the gospel without being all weird about it. Like, kind of pray for, do you believe? You didn't do that there. But it's a way to share where your identity comes from in the midst of an apology, too.
Where I really would like to end is Aaron, where you kind of ended on this note that the gospel must make a difference in our lives. And as you said that, I was wondering about, what would you say to somebody who's watching who maybe doesn't see or feel that difference, whether in their conversion story or maybe they've been a Christian for a while and they feel like it's been a while since they've experienced that gospel change, that fruit change. How would you encourage them, or what would you recommend that they maybe focus some attention on over the next days?
Before I answer, would you like to answer? Because I always jump in.
Well, thank you, Aaron. What I would say is don't hesitate to take one step, right? One step closer to Christ. So I get caught up in this trap a lot, and my wife will attest to this because she has to talk me through it, where I feel like I have the Grand Canyon to leap across, in my faith journey, right? And I can't do it because it's this huge leap that I'll never make, as opposed to just saying, well, I'm just going to take one step today. I'll take one step tomorrow, closer and closer, and just start on that path, continue making progress on that path. Just take a single step forward.
Yeah, I would also say that in those steps forward, it's important to understand the reality of the gospel, that God doesn't love you more when you take a step forward or fall 2 steps back, that the gospel covers you just in all those places exactly the same. And so you can trust what God is saying and doing. I would also recommend getting some close friends in your life if you don't have any, or someone a little close, and sitting down for lunch and just asking, do you see any difference in my life? Because a lot of times we don't see the difference that God's making in our lives. Right out here, we have this palm tree that we planted. They were here, but we put faucets around them to give them water, and they were like 2 feet away. And now over here, there's this palm tree. It's pushing one of the things right out of the way because it grew too big. And we're like, what? And no one noticed that it grew like that because you're around it all the time. We are around ourselves all the time, and we don't notice the growth or the change that takes place in us, but I think other people do. And so I think it's important that we are in community with other people, and it's not, when you take those steps, those steps don't even have to be taken alone. They can be taken with other people, and that's why we emphasize gospel communities in Element.
Yeah.
Because it's meant to be taken with others, because it's not a solo journey. We're saved individually, but we are saved into the church, into the family of God, into the body of believers, so we do it together.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for your time today. That wraps up our first episode of Talking Element. If you have any questions or anything that you don't have somebody that you can wrestle with, please email us. Email info@ourelement.org, and we will try to help connect you with somebody who you can maybe wrestle with some of these questions with. And we really encourage you now to spend some time thinking through these questions for yourself, how you would answer them, and spend some time in prayer. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week with more questions.